Howdy, 8th grade. Today we're going to talk about different characteristics of parabolas, characteristics of quadratic functions. So first we're going to have to go over some new vocab, which I don't think will be too bad. A lot of it's self-explanatory for the most part. The one big new word that we don't necessarily know is going to be the vertex. So the vertex of a parabola is going to be the turning point. The turning point of a parabola. So if I have a parabola here, it would be that part right there, or if I have a down-facing parabola, it would be that part right there. So that would be the vertex. A couple other things. A minimum. That's the wrong color. There we go. Minimum is going to be the lowest point, the lowest y value, which is going to be that right there. And the maximum is going to be opposite of that, which is the highest y value. We should be able to find right there. So the minimum of a function, the minimum of the parabola, is going to be the lowest point, and the maximum is going to be the highest point. So if we graph a parabola, let me do that real quick. All right, so I just graphed the parabola y equals negative x squared plus 4x plus 1. If you graph that, this right here is what you will get. And looking at it, it's very easy to see where the vertex is. So we can say that the vertex, it's got to be this point right there. My vertex is at, and that would be 2, 5. 2, 5, and that would be my vertex. And then I can ask myself, what is the minimum and maximum? The minimum is the lowest point. If we look, it goes down, just kind of keeps going down. So I'm going to say there is no minimum. But if we look for a maximum, we do have a maximum of 5. So our parabola will never go any higher than 5. That's its maximum. It has no minimum, and the vertex is there at 2, 5. So I got one more bit of vocab for us, and that's going to be that, not vertex, the zeros of a function, or the zeros of a parabola, are the x values when y equals 0. So I'm looking for the x values when y equals 0. So we're going to start by looking at the equation. Let me make sure I'm writing this down right. Y equals negative x squared plus 2x plus 3. And from this, I want to figure out what the zeros are. So we got a couple options. My first option, which I'm not necessarily going to recommend too often because it takes a while, is going to be graphing. So let's actually graph this one together, so we make sure we know how to graph these functions. So if I were to do this, I'd start by making my xy table. And I like picking some small x's because that's going to make my life easier. So I'm going to start with 0, negative 1, and 1. So I plug in 0 for x here. I get negative 0 squared plus 2 times 0 plus 3. And that's going to be 0 plus 0 plus 3. And that's just going to end up being 3 for me. So I'm going to write a 3 right there. If I plug in negative 1, negative 1 squared is 1. That's negative, so I end up with negative 1 plus 2 times negative 1, which is negative 2 plus 3. Look at that, that's going to be a 0. And at 1 here, I am going to have, let's see, x squared, let me erase that part, put this 0 back. Here we go. I will have negative 1 squared, which is negative 1, plus 2 times 1, plus 3. Negative 1 plus 2 is 1, plus 3 is 4. This is getting a little bit interesting. So it is, so I'm going to graph what I have so far, and we're going to see what all we got. So if I graph this, I know at 0 I have 3. At 1 I have 4. And at -1, I have 0. So I think that it looks like our parabola is doing something like this. So if I'm going to want to find the 0, my next 0 should be somewhere over here. So I'm going to keep going more in the positive direction. And to do that, I'm going to do x is 2. If I plug in a 2, what's going to happen is I get negative x squared. Negative x squared would be negative 2 squared. Let's try that out. So negative 2 squared would give me negative 4 plus 3. Negative 4 plus 4 is 0. 0 plus 3 is 3, so I get a 3 there. And I can continue this right along at 2. And now I'm going to try 3, because it looks like we're going down again. And I think this might get us to where we're supposed to be. So I'm going to plug in my 3. I get negative 3 squared plus 2 times 3 is 6 plus 3. That would be negative 9 plus 6 is negative 3. Negative 3 plus 3 is 0. So I found my other 0. It would be right. Oh, make sure I'm back to white. There it is. Right that way. And I have found both my zeros. They are at, see, that would be negative 1, 0 and 3, 0. So another way to write this would be I have zeros at negative 1 and 3. And that would be my final answer. And that was a lot of work. That took us a while. So I want to show you guys the easy way to do this. And the easy way to do this is we are going to factor. So I have y equals negative x squared plus 2x plus 3. Negative x squared plus 2x plus 3. And from this, I can actually make that equal to 0. 0 equals negative x squared plus 2x plus 3. And what I'm going to do, just because I'm a little weird, is I think this is going to be a lot easier if I multiply both sides by negative 1. So I have negative 1 times 0 equals negative 1 times negative x squared plus 2x plus 3. And what that's going to do is I get 0 equals x squared minus 2x minus 3. I really like having this as a positive, so I just multiplied it by negative 1 so I could get there. And now if I want to factor this, I have to find two numbers that are going to multiply to negative 2, and multiply to negative 3 and add to negative 2. So if I want to do that, I would have x minus 3 and x plus 1 equals 0 still. And if I want these to equal 0, what I have to do is for one of them to equal 0. So 0 times anything is 0. So either x minus 3 equals 0 or x plus 1 equals 0. And these will be real easy to solve. X equals 3 or x equals negative 1. And that right there would be my answer for the zeros. If we look back up, I have negative 1 and 3 there, negative 1 and 3 here, and just like that, we are good to go. There is one other way that we don't really need to worry about too much right now, but if you're really desperate, we have the quadratic formula. So if you don't want to write this, you don't have to, but it is very, very helpful if you're ever in a pickle. And that is that x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a when 0 equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So we could have just plugged in. I started with 0 equals negative 1 x squared plus 2x plus 3, and I could have plugged these in. That would be my a, b, and c here. So plugging my b in first, I would have x equals negative b, which is 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared would be 4, minus 4 times 3 times negative 1. 3 times negative 1 is negative 3, times 4 is negative 12. Divided by 2a, which would be negative 2. And that's not too bad so far. So I have negative 2 over negative 2. If we look at that, that's going to equal 1 plus or minus 4 minus negative 12 is 16. Square root of 16 is 4 over negative 2. So I end up with 1 plus or minus negative 2, which is going to give me 1 plus negative 2 is negative 1. 1 minus negative 2 is 3. And that'll give me the same thing, maybe a little bit quicker if you don't want to factor, or factoring works just as well. There's one more thing we need to know, which is the axis of symmetry. I'm going to rush through this one because I think it's fairly easy, which is the line through the middle of our parabola. Parabola. So if we look at my parabola way up here, there it is. What the line of symmetry would be is a line that cuts it cleanly in half right there. So I'm going to draw that again down by where it actually says axis of symmetry. That might be useful. So if I have a parabola, the axis of symmetry is that line right here. And for my axis of symmetry, the equation will always be x equals negative b over 4a. Sorry, not 4a. I messed that up. That should be negative b over 2a. There we go. That's our equation for the middle of a parabola. If you don't want to use that, then you can always just graph it, find it that way. Pretty simple. In any case, I hope y'all kind of didn't think it was too hard looking at a little bit of extra vocab. Don't worry too much about the quadratic formula. I know that was probably a little bit confusing, but I figured I would show you guys every way to find the zeros while we're talking about the zeros, and I will see y'all in class tomorrow. Have a great day.